have made a very recent discovery. It seems that there is still a lot of retinoid fear. How do I know this? Well, I recently spent a full day in my clinic meeting the top beauty journalists in the UK. And what struck me as staggering is that even though these are some of the smartest people in the business, I'd say half of them admitted to not using a retinoid on a regular basis. And probing into that, the reason is that struggle to get through those difficult first 6 weeks of retinization. So I thought I'd put together a list of my top 5 hacks for breaking down that barrier, getting on board with the best possible skincare routine around. I mean, retinoids are important, but then so is Hector. But let's rewind. Let's just remind ourselves what a retinoid is. So retinoid is the family name of ingredients that are derived from vitamin A. Everything from retinol, which I consider to be at the weaker end of the spectrum, through to retinal, inactive retinoid. Then we get into prescription land, different or adapalene, and retin-A or tretinoin. Tazarotene, don't use that very much. So that is the spectrum of retinoids that we have available. And the reason they're so important, the gold standard, both when it comes to treating aging, that's premature from sun damage, and also acne, is because they have so many different ways of interacting with our skin. Everything from cell turnover, which leads to better texture, pore clarity, so unclogging those dead skin cells that would normally form comedones, to making our skin tone more even because they help regulate melanocyte function, right down to the dermis, to where our collagen, elastin, and hyaluronic acid are produced. All of it. They go into cells, they bind to retinoid receptors, and their magic happens. Now, of course, in life, nothing that is that valuable is straightforward. There is this process of retinization. Oftentimes can last anywhere from 6 weeks, even 3 months and beyond, depending on the potency or strength of the retinoid that you're using. So, how to get through that initial hurdle, get over that hurdle, to get into this beautiful space where retinoids have this magical impact on our skin. So let me talk you through the things I find the most helpful to getting you on board with a retinoid routine. So step number 1 is to start gently. Now, when I say gently, I mean almost view your first retinoid period of use. So let's call that 3 months. That's around 2 skin cycles. Your conditioning treatment. You would not expect to start running having been a couch potato for a couple of years, and you wouldn't expect to do 10K overnight. So think of getting used to using a retinoid as being a bit like training. Almost expect nothing very much to happen because you've gone in nice and low. So what does that mean practically? Well, something like retinol, you'd go in with something like 0.3%, which is pretty sort of gentle. Retinaldehyde, 0.05%, inactive retinoid, 2%. And it's a curious one because it's really pretty efficacious for something that is relatively less likely to irritate your skin. That is part of its kind of, in my view, very favorable sort of side effect profile. And I would encourage you that if you're not seeing a doctor on a regular basis to help manage your retinoid use in the early days, I would generally recommend that you do go for a non-prescription retinoid first. On prescription, definitely worth thinking about starting with adapalene before tretinoin. It has a narrower spectrum of activity, so more limited when it comes to those kind of aging prevention and improvement signs, but it is so much easier to tolerate at the beginning. And at the end of the day, this is a strategy for years. We're talking years, decades even. So weeks to months to get through that difficult period without any redness or dryness or irritation, it's kind of worth it. So aim low, aim for a regular habit that doesn't irritate you or create difficulties where you have to stop for a couple of days or you struggle putting on your makeup. Aim low, aim consistent, and things will go well. Step number 2 is a suggestion. If you are worried about retinoid side effects, skip morning actives altogether and give your retinoid at night your undivided attention. Now, it can be so tempting, particularly when you're shopping brands like The Ordinary, the Inky List. There's so many actives, they all sound really good, to want to cram everything in at the beginning. This would be a mistake, my friends. We want to give a retinoid our undivided attention when we are feeling our way, because at the end of the day, if you have multiple actives in a routine and you can't gauge which one is doing what, you'll never really know where your time and energy is best invested. So my suggestion to you would be focus on your retinoid, get used to using that by itself, get comfortable with that before bringing in extra actives in the morning. The reality is stacking multiple actives can just lead to more irritation and confuse you because it may not be clear. Is it that ingredient or is it that one? Or is it just a consequence of using both together? So given that retinoids probably have the greatest potential of all the actives, maybe aside from benzoyl peroxide, to be irritating, focus on that. Step number 3 is to support your retinoid with the right products. Now, a great skincare routine is like an orchestra, and you are the conductor. Now, your retinoid might be the star violinist, but it needs the rest of the band to come together to support it to deliver beautiful music. So, sort out the following. Firstly, a non-drying cleanser. My preference is for a non-foaming, non-clogging, wash-off gel-based cleanser, but you do you. Number 2, a barrier supporting moisturizer, ideally enriched with something like niacinamide or ceramides, because you want a strong, healthy barrier to help you manage the retinoid-based changes or flux, shall we say. Now, you might be tempted to skimp on moisturizer if you're acne prone. Don't be. Moisturizer is your friend, and by leaning into hydration, you'll find that your skin will adapt to using a retinoid much easier. A concept of buffering, where you actually use your moisturizer before your retinoid, is perhaps the most useful step in skincare, particularly when it comes to building up retinoid tolerance. Finally, of course, we want a broad spectrum sunscreen in the mix every day without asking, do I need one? Because together with your retinoid, it is the ultimate duo for helping you preserve and maintain your collagen levels, which is absolutely the secret to aging gracefully. So retinoid, sunscreen, they go together like hand in glove. Step number 4 is to protect the sensitive bits. Now, perhaps the most common error in the early days of retinoid use is the accidental swipe across the eyelid. You wake up the next morning, your eyes are red, everything's puffy, you're worried you've had an allergic reaction. Now, do not fret. This will happen to you at some point in time. It happens to all of us. It still occasionally happens to me, and we're talking of, 10 years plus use. It's fine. But we should do our best to prevent it. And that is why I created the concept of, you guessed it, the Moisturizer Goggles. Now, if you're new to the channel, let me tell you what Moisturizer Goggles are. Essentially, what we do after we've cleansed at night, and retinoids are always a nighttime thing, always. We apply after cleansing a good, visible layer of moisturizer around our eyes. And that is to create a barrier to product migration or actual transfer using hands, to avoid retinoids landing on our eyelids unintentionally. It doesn't take very much to create that red puffy appearance, let me tell you. So by doing that, you create a barrier between the world and your eyelid, and that should prevent it from happening in the first place. Now, I have many patients who have continued to use the goggles throughout their retinoid journeys, just because it's a sort of a foolproof way of ensuring that you can treat pretty close to the eye area, or, in the eye area, depending on what you're trying to target. But it means you're doing everything very consciously and in a careful, measured manner, and that's the way to avoid problems. Similarly, we want to avoid retinoids creeping onto the lip area, so applying lip balm before a retinoid step is also a great idea. And even something as simple as Vaseline can provide that physical barrier that prevents migration of retinoids onto areas we don't want them to. Also, think about any areas where you might have fine lines or little grooves, which is common around the corner of the mouth, or inside the crease of the nose, another very common place for retinoid to collect and irritate and cause redness and dryness. And this is particularly unpleasant around the nose and the lips. So again, use your moisturizer to prevent those areas having product collect and just wipe them after you've applied your retinoid so that you are precise and you know exactly where it's going. Step number 5, and this is the most important step yet, measure your dose. Perhaps the single biggest problem in terms of retinoid use is getting the dose right. You need less than you think. We talk about using a pea-sized amount of product. And I think if you're just starting out, you can look at that and think, huh? How much? I urge you to walk over to your freezer right now, investigate the size of a pea. It really is a very, very small amount. I don't want you thinking about a broad bean or anything larger, basically. So a pea-sized amount. And the reason why that is so important is because all we want is a thin smear all over, avoiding those sensitive areas. We don't want any excess on the skin at all. You shouldn't be there for hours rubbing product in. That means you have used too much. Now, much like the Moisturizer Goggles, I have devised my 13-dot technique to help make this easier for you. So what does that entail? Why 13? The reason I developed this in the first place was because a patient had been applying their products in a very specific manner. It was a guy and he was doing a lot of this. And when I reviewed him, it was apparent that he wasn't applying everything evenly and getting blended edges. So we came up with this idea, 13-dot technique, to ensure that you get a little bit everywhere and not too much in any one place in particular. So the 13 dots go like this. We have 3 on the forehead. We have another 3 on each cheek, so that gets us to 9, 2 on the nose, 2 on the chin. Now, with that P, you're probably running out of product by the time you get to the chin. That's just fine. That helps educate you as to how little you need. And that 13-dot business helps you make a very small amount go surprisingly far. If you get used to doing that from the very beginning, you really shouldn't have too much of a problem of overdosing. I think the other thing that having the 13-dot technique in your toolkit that it does is that it slows down your thinking. It makes you do things in a more careful and considered way. And that's exactly what we want here until you get truly built up your experience as to how to use your retinoid correctly. Also, the nice upside of it is that you're actually getting this lovely, even field change. Field change meaning you want those benefits all over. I've seen a lot of kind of retinoid behavior. People have maybe focused it just on the jawline where they get breakouts, or just on their T-zone where they've got clogged pores or teen breakouts, and actually missing out on all those beautifying benefits that come from using a retinoid regularly. And that is one of the best parts of it. Even if you're treating a problem, whilst you're dialing that down with using your retinoid, you're dialing up the beauty of your skin. And if you like this video, I think you'll love my Retinoid Revelations playlist. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye for now.